Our three judges tonight are actually the same three we had a year ago, the same month. Brent Weinbrenner, Krista Dix, and Ken Pfeiffer. Brent has a MS from Brooks and a BA in accounting from Indiana University. He's a freelance editorial and corporate location photographer, filmmaker, and multimedia producer. His stock photographs and video footage are represented by Getty Images and by DV Archives. He taught introductory photography, location lighting, and the business of editorial photography at Brooks. And he leads photography tours in Guatemala. So Brent, thank you very much for judging for us tonight. There he is. Good. Our other pro judge is Krista Dix. Krista was the founder and director of Wallspace Creative, a gallery in Santa Barbara. The gallery had a 15-year history of showcasing and supporting emerging and mid-career photographic artists. Krista is now the associate director of the Griffin Museum of Photography in Boston. And so she's coming to us remotely. Unfortunately, it's at the Eastern time zone. So Krista, thank you very much for sticking it out so late here. Griffin Museum of Photography in Boston, the main museum complex and its multiple satellite galleries throughout Boston showcase and support photographic artists from around the world to educate and to inspire. So Krista, thank you so much for coming all the way from Boston.
Oh, my pleasure.
There she is. Okay. And Ken Pfeiffer, our club judge. Ken enjoys all sorts of photography, in particular architecture and real estate. He also likes to shoot events, weddings, portraits, nature, and landscapes. And he loves playing with Photoshop and creative photography. He's a past president of the Camera Club and has won numerous awards for his photography, including Images of the Year. So thank you, Ken. And I'll turn it over to Bill.
Welcome to the June Juried Exhibition Night. We'll just get right into things. I think everybody is familiar with the scoring. We just put it up here for good measure. Our first category for the evening is Altered Reality. And our first image will be critiqued by Ken Pfeiffer. This is Birds of Paradise.
Okay, this is a very pleasant image. It has really nice colors. It would make a nice bedspread or curtains or something like that. Birds of Paradise is a common theme, you know, the metaphor of birds of paradise, the plant being flying birds, and the birds, the actual birds on the wire here, sort of reinforce that metaphor with the electric poles, etc. Now the actual flower is very beautiful and very colorful, and the color in this image is in a textured background. And I'm questioning the relevance of that textured background here because I'm not sure it adds to the appeal of this image. The other thing is when I take pictures and there are telephone poles and wires in them, people usually ask me to remove them. And so I think for the large part, people don't really care for telephone poles and wires. So I'm not sure how this is relevant in this picture. It actually just adds some visual confusion. Okay, so that's it.
The total score, it's 21.
Okay. Our next image is Garden of Souls, and this is Brent Weinbrenner.
So I'm not very smart, so I didn't get this until I read the title, and then it totally clicked for me. The problem I have with it is the background is a little too, in spite of the treatment, the post-production treatment is too easy to read, and I think it conflicts with the pretty clever image of those umbrellas that are all gathered up. So maybe had the photographer chosen a lower point of view and isolated those against the sky a little bit more, it might have been helpful, but I just found the background didn't work very well with the with the subject matter. And the telephone poles are another example of that. But the concept, once I read the title, I loved it. And again, I'm not very smart, so I appreciated the title.
19 is the score.
Next image is Into the Woods, and this is Krista.
I actually really like this. I thought it was interesting. The palette is super mysterious. And my question is the figure on the right is, I don't know if it's a he or she, they seem to be carrying that bird along, which I thought was a little bit weird and super interesting. So I kept looking at this image for a while and finding something new in it every time I looked. That background was great to provide the forest and the trees and the outline of the palette. But what I also really loved was the light coming through the trees. So I think it was a pretty well done image.
22 is the score.
Next image is Lone Fisherman. Ken Pfeiffer commented.
This is really beautiful. It's very serene. I love the serene, cool color palette. The water's serene. I think the technique's very nice, and I think the texture here is pleasing. There's a reverse vignette on this that adds to this sort of ethereal quality. So it makes me feel very calm looking at this. There are a couple of problems with this, and one is, the first one is there's some posterization. If you look closely at this picture, around the fisherman in the water, there's some pink and blue banding, and this is normally when you are using a fairly low bit depth, like 8 bits per channel, and you do a lot of manipulations, that can occur. So a recommendation would be to use 16 bits per channel if you're gonna do a lot of stuff to it. The other thing is there's that shadow that's right against the bottom border. Looks like a shadow of a fishing pole or something. And that's distracting when you get things hanging down right next to the border. And I would recommend either getting rid of that or moving the whole image, moving the boat up just a little bit. That's it.
17 is the score.
Next image is Prelude to Flight. And this is Brent Weinbrenner commenting.
When I first looked at this, I kind of wanted to write it off because I thought the drop shadow was a little bit gimmicky. And then I started looking more carefully and I saw the small birds in there and I got really drawn into it. And so I've grown to like this image a lot. The one suggestion I might have is just to give the 2 larger birds a little bit more breathing room on the edge. But it's an image that took me a few seconds to really get into, and I do appreciate it.
20 is the score.
Next image is Tranquil Tides. This is Krista Dix commenting.
I enjoyed this image. The palette is beautiful. It's so romantic. And it reminds me of my sunrises now. So while it may be a sunset for all of you, I have to get used to the fact that the sun comes up over the water for me. So the movement was good. The balance was good. It's just a simple, clean, lovely image that you can just sort of fall into and feel peaceful with.
23 is the score.
Next image is Trapped by Corona. This is Ken Pfeiffer commenting.
Okay, this is a really interesting technique, and this image is quite distressing, and that may be the point of it. I'm not really sure what I'm looking at. I'm not sure if this is a play on the word corona, you know, the virus versus the sun. I don't know, and it's hard to see the figures that are swirling around the middle. And I'm not sure, I'm really not sure what I'm looking at. And the rusting corrosion may be a metaphor just for this is getting old, but I don't know. I just don't see a real clear story here.
Oh, can I step up on that one? I do see this, I kind of see the story here. I mean, we just did an exhibition on Corona as in the light from the sun because we wanted to reframe the idea of the virus. Everybody's doing virus images, and I can see the hands in this one. I can feel the depth and the idea of the Corona. I'm not sure it needs the extra texture around the outside. I would have been just fine with the center image and leaving the other extraneous stuff out. So I would have brought actually the circle Corona, and you can almost even see that it was almost a halo Corona too. So I think it plays on both pieces. I would just crop it a little tighter and have it be about the Corona and not about that negative space.
Mhm.
21 is the score.
The next image is White Queens, critiqued by Brent Weinberg. Brent.
I feel like I'm in Paris in the 20 with the avant-garde or surreal photographers. And I'm not quite sure how I feel about it as a standalone image. I think in a body of work that has some continuity to it, I might spark to it and understand it better. As it is, I'm a little bit challenged to understand it, but I think if the photographer has a theme going and has exercised the same vision across a number of images, then maybe they're beginning to say something. But I struggled with it, and I was taken back 100 years.
15 is the score.
So this is the end of the category. Damien, we have the accepted images ready to go.
Yeah.
So here we go.
So the first one would be Birds of Paradise by Zoltan Pushkas. Into the Woods by Bill Banning. Tranquil Tides by Chris Seaton. Trapped by Corona, Patty Gaccio.
Okay, so that's the total. That's all of the categories accepted images. We'll move on into the nature category.
Yeah.
And the first image will be critiqued by Krista Dix. It is April Showers.
I like this image. The only issue I had with it is I wanted to be closer to it. I almost wanted to take it into abstraction and crop it down a little bit more so that I lost a little bit of the background, so that it was all about the sedum petals and the water. Otherwise, color's good. It's nice and sharp. It holds visual interest, and I feel like if it were just a little bit tighter, I could just sit there and look at it and learn something new or see something new every time I look at it.
Score is 22.
Next image is Bird Perch. Ken Pfeiffer commenting.
This is a nice bird portrait. It's pretty sharp all over. It's a nice pose. Has a nice position in the frame. The eye is right at the rule of thirds point. There's good detail here. There's nice feathers. Kind of like the sky color. It's unique and it's pleasing. What could be improved here is I actually took this and put it in Photoshop and played with it. There's no white point. There's nothing in here that's completely white. So if you push the white slider over until the whites just start to clip, it increases the contrast and makes this look a lot better. Also, if you look under the wing, there's a lot of color noise, a lot of green and magenta splotching. And you can take that color noise reduction slider and push it all the way over without affecting the image sharpness very much. Also, there might be some slight bluish color cast in this whole thing.
Wait, Bronte.
There might be a slight bluish color cast here. And a nice technique to see if there's a color cast is add a Hers adjustment layer, change the auto settings to enhance per channel contrast, and snap the neutral midtones and apply that. when I did that, it took away what appeared to be the color contrast and made the colors a lot more pleasing. The final thing with it, or not the second to last thing, is that this may be enlarged too much. If you look very carefully around the borders of this bird, there's a lot of JPEG artifacts which make it look softer. And finally, you might consider cropping this in a bit more tightly because there's a lot of negative space here.
Score is 19.
The next image is Chiapas at Dusk, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
I have this identical image, only it's Guatemala at sunrise. I think the tree on the left-hand side isn't strong enough to carry the day. I would either lose it or add more of it, and maybe add a little bit of on the horizon. And yeah, the tree without a bird flying into it or something, just my eye is going there, and I don't think that's where the photographer wants it to go. So.
Score is 22.
The next image is Colors. This is critiqued by Krista Dix.
I enjoyed this image. I love the bird. The eye is just amazing. Color palette is great. The only thing, there's something about the balance that is just slightly off. I want it either more left. I'd love to see it flying into the frame as opposed to living on one half of it, or flying out of the frame. There's just something about its placement. It's not quite center, but I'd almost like to see it shift a little bit left from here to give it more breathing room. That makes sense.
The score is 23.
Next image is Cow. And this is Ken Pfeiffer.
Okay, this is well exposed. There's good sharpness with the eye. I like the eyelashes. The ear fuzz is nice sharpness. The colors are good. It's an interesting pose. The depth of field is pretty good. I would recommend zooming out some because it's not good to cut off parts of an animal or have tangents with the edge of the frame. If you look at the horn, it's on the point of being cut off, but it's certainly tangent, which is distracting. Also, the scum around the mouth and some of the hairs is not real attractive. And there's, of course, this is nature, so there's nothing you can do about it.
Score is 22.
Next image is Flight of the Honeybee, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
I have a couple comments on this. I'd like to see the highlight values in the flower come down a little bit. My eye keeps getting drawn away from the bee and into those highlights on the right-hand side. So if those came down a little bit, I think it would help me hold my attention on the bee. And I'd like to see some of that leaf at the bottom get cropped out so that that darker space below the leaf disappears, which I think would also help bring your attention back to the bee. But certainly can't argue with the moment that's captured.
Mm-hmm.
Score is 24.
The next image is Grass Mountain, Krista Dix critiquing.
I thought this was a lovely image. I'm a little concerned about the overwhelming amount of green against, I would like to see a little bit more contrast in the sky. You've got so much going on in the image that having a defined white point and having a little bit bluer sky is going to really pop those greens, especially because of the difference between the olive in the background and the Kelly in the front. Otherwise, I thought it was well composed and just of another image that I could just see myself walking through.
Score is 21.
Next image is Guava Blossom. Ken Pfeiffer commenting.
This is just beautiful. Really good complementary colors. There's really good sharpness here, pretty good depth of field, and nice contrast. The anthers are very sharp, and I love the veins on the petal at camera left, but the problem is they're not in focus. It might be better to have an even greater depth of field so I could see that very beautiful part of the flower. And also, there's a leaf in the background at camera left, which is too bright, in my opinion. It's distracting. Might be good to burn that down a little bit.
Score is 22.
Next image is Hooded Oriole. Brent Weinbrenner critiquing.
Tough time of day. I think the contrast values between the highlights and shadows are pretty extreme. The trimmed foliage kind of blows my fantasy of being in the wild, as well as it looks like a roof in the background. So I think, careful selection of background would help pull off an illusion here. And the highlight values in the foliage, where there's no detail in the highlights are distracting. So perhaps a little bit tighter crop to get the oriole out of the center of the frame and eliminate the flower on the left would be helpful. But really be careful with the backgrounds because that gray blows the illusion of nature.
Score is 20.
Next image is Hummingbird. Krista Dix critiquing.
Once again, I really love the color palette on this. There's something about that softness, really nice texture in the back of that hummingbird too. I mean, it's an impossible shot to get. So props to being able to capture that. The balance on it is a little bit off for me. But I don't, I'm not coming up with anything right now to fix it. So overall, it's a really solid image.
Score is 24.
Next image is Kangaroo Rat. Ken Pfeiffer critiquing.
I'm going to give this one a 10 for cuteness. This is a great environmental portrait. Looks like it's in a nest. Great lighting. Looks like studio lighting. There's catch lights in both eyes. It's very sharp. Great contrast from black to white. Depth of field is wonderful. My only suggestion would be that there's a lot of high frequency stuff, these grasses, especially on at camera right and in the bottom left-hand corner. That might be burned down to bring more attention back to the rat.
Score is 25.
Next image is Looking Back at You. Brent Weinbrenner critiquing.
I'd like to have a little bit more breathing room with this image, just to see the back of the curve of that neck and the little bit below the beak. Perhaps by opening up a little bit, it enhances some of the storytelling quality. The little bit of dark value in the upper right hand is drawing my eye. Focus is great. I think for me, just a little more breathing room and the ability to complete that S curve on the neck.
Score is 22.
Next image is Mommy, I'm Shy. Krista Dix critiquing.
I want to know what well, I can tell about the title, but for me, it's a good image. I'm just concerned that there's way too much on the right that throws the balance off of the rest of the frame. I'd almost like more a tighter crop on that to see either take it all the way in or take it all the way out, I think, to give it some space. But for me, the balance is off because you've got the tree on the left and then you've got that open space on the right. And I'd almost like to see them either have more space or less, but otherwise it's a hard image to get. I just did a book on Africa, so I know that it's dealing with the big five. You don't really have many options to ask them to go back and stand there again. So good job on the capture.
Score is 20.
Next image is Nesting Petrel, South Georgia Island, Ken Pfeiffer critiquing.
This is another beautiful environmental portrait. It's beautiful colors, really nice and sharp. The exposure is good. The mountains and the water are stunning. It might be better to have a little greater depth of field because the mountains aren't quite sharp. And the major problem I have with this is we have a lot of high frequency detail in the foreground. All those grasses are quite distracting. So I would consider cropping a lot of that out and or burning it down so it didn't attract so much attention.
Score is 25.
Next image is Anomea Waterfalls, Brent Weinbrenner critiquing.
Well, these are some classic lines, so it's beautiful. My only thought might be to have a slightly longer shutter speed to get even more of a cottony effect in the falls and in the area where it's spilling. So I'd let the shutter run a little bit longer and maybe a little bit more shadow detail, but I love the idea that normally I don't like triangles on the edges of frames, but I like that little bit of highlight at the top so that we know that there's an end to this and we can envision ourselves walking up there. But the lines are classic. So I would just maybe play with a little bit longer exposure to accentuate the cottony feel.
Score is 23.
Next image is Preening Parrot, Krista Dix critiquing.
I think this goes with Kangaroo Rat in the world's cutest image. I love the foot is really sort of engaging to me. I'm a little concerned with the heat on the parrot's head. It just seems a little too bright. I wouldn't mind bringing that down, and maybe a little more vignetting to sort of draw us into the center, but a good solid image.
Score is 25.
Next image is Red Eye, critiqued by Ken Pfeiffer.
So this is another just great bird portrait. There's super depth of field. Everything that should be in focus is, and then it falls off into the backgrounds, which is really nice. There's great sharpness on the feathers. Love the water droplets, good colors. Love the textures in the water. It's a really nice touch with the bubbles and the water dripping off from the bill. It's very nice. And I love the reflections of the eye and the feathers in the foreground. That's a super nice touch.
Score 24.
Next image is Rest Break, Brent Weinbrenner critiquing.
I could really relate to this image because I feel like this a lot of the time. The expression and the body is perfect. It's spot on. The thing that kills it for me is the branch it's running across. And so I played with it, turning it into a vertical and losing the half of the body, and that didn't work. And so I don't know if there was an opportunity for the photographer to come around to the left a little bit and maybe minimize the impact of that branch. But boy, the left side of the frame sure is awesome. I love the expression.
Score is 22.
Next image is Sierra Meadow, critiqued by Krista Dix.
Well, this is certainly another lovely classic landscape image. It's simple and open. I almost want to see it as a vertical to give it more sky and less ground, because you've got all those beautiful the florals up front, and I wouldn't mind having a path or feeling like I'm on some sort of journey into the image that way. But overall, a little bit more contrast, but overall a good image.
The score is 20.
The next image is Snow Mounts. This is critiqued by Ken Pfeiffer.
This is a really unique image, very nice shapes, and there's very good exposure of a tough subject. You know, the snow is very hard to get right, and this is good because it's not blown out and it's still white, and there's a really nice texture in there. Very good depth of field, nice and sharp. My problem with this image is, you know, where's the center of attention? Where's the focus?
Score is 20.
Next image is Sprouting, critiqued by Brent Weinbrenner.
The rule of thirds here, perhaps. And I would look to isolate the poppy against a green part of the background as opposed to letting the tones run into the flower behind it. Having said that, I think it's kind of nice that the green stem is popping against the flower below. But I think overall I would have looked to shift my position slightly to the right to isolate it against a contrasting background. The focus is nice. The level of detail in the background I think is just about perfect, and that it's suggestive but not literal. So the composition for me was a little bit awkward. So, you know, maybe again lean on the rule of thirds. And I like the relatively flat contrast range as well.
Okay. Score was 19.
Next image is Warbler on a Thistle Bush, Krista Dix critiquing.
I like the composition of this. I just wish there was more vibrancy in the bird itself to pull it out of the background. I don't know if it was intentional to have it be as flat as it is, but again, nice composition. I like the layout of the bird. I want that yellow belly to come screaming at me as hot as the flowers in the background.
Score was 23.
Right, and accepted images, Damien.
We had 16. And the first one is April Showers, Bruce Straits. Chipas at Dusk, Dave Basso. Colors, John Staplenagel. Cow, Carrie Topliff. Flight of the Honeybee, Jeff Lipschitz. Grass Mountain, Steve Sherrill. Guava Blossom, Zoltan Pushkas. Hummingbird, Patty Gacho. Kangaroo Rat, Stuart Wilson. Looking back at you, Bill Hellier. Nesting Petro, South Georgia Island, Bob Rottenberg. Let's see, yeah. Omea Waterfalls, George Wellick. preening parrot, Charlie Henry. Red eye, Ron Williams. Rest break, Ron Avis. Wobbler on a thistle bush, Don Green.
All right, and that's the end of the categories accepted images. Our next category is open. The first image is Barn Owl, and it is Ken Pfeiffer critiquing.
Another great bird portrait. Really good sharpness here, nice detail, wonderful bokeh, good exposure, good position in the frame, nice color balance. I like the way the bird pops out from the background as well. So great job.
Score is 21.
Next image is Cambodian water lily. There we go.
I think either pull in a little tighter or come out. I think my preference would be more breathing room. The highlight values are a little bit too hot. I'd love to see a little bit of color in the petals on the right-hand side. These images are we see them frequently enough that I think everything has to be perfect. So the shape of the petal on the lower left is a little bit distracting. And the vertical lines in the background, I don't know if a little bit shallower depth of field might have helped eliminate that bit of distraction. But I think coming back in a little bit lower exposure value would have helped.
Score is 21.
Next image is Celebrate, critiqued by Krista Dix.
I love the movement in this image. I liked the depth and the highlight of the woman in front with the green action happening in the back. The only issue I have is, and it's absolutely impossible to capture this without a lot of patience and maybe a little bit of luck, is that the leg in the foreground is cutting off the face of the person behind her on the right-hand side. So if I'd had a little bit more room, I would have waited for that leg to drop. But photographing dance is super difficult, so kudos to getting a great solid image.
Score is 22.
Next image is Cloudy Sunrise, critiqued by Ken Pfeiffer.
This is really a dramatic photo. I really like it. The sun rays are very interesting. And for me, the subject is the sun rays on those hazy hills in the background. This photo is great because it has a lot of apparent depth. We have a foreground, middle ground, and background. A couple of things that bother me a little. The clouds at the top layer of clouds is a little grungy looking, like it's been over processed with a local detail. And the other thing that bothers me is the foreground is just a lot of high frequency chop, which is distracting. So I think this would be a stronger image if the top and the bottom were cropped down.
The score is 20.
Next image is Colors at the Beach, Brent Weinbrenner critiquing.
I really like the color of the hillside being mirrored by the moss on the underside of that rock. Came as a surprise to me. I mean, it's a nice visual play that is again surprising. All the noise on the beach is distracting, so I played around with cropping up the right-hand side of it, and that seemed to help a little bit in my mind. The sand in the lower left doesn't do anything, and I wondered if the photographer might have been able to come around to their left a little bit with a low angle of view shooting over the top of this rock, eliminating all the junk on the beach and just showing the rocks silhouetted against the sky while still capturing the hillside. Because the play between the colors is, in my view, the story. And if you could accentuate that without all the distracting stuff, I think you got a pretty cool image.
Score is 18.
Next image is Coping with COVID, Krista Dix critiquing.
I mean, this is the topic, right? Everybody's trying to navigate how to make it through like the last 90 days. Everybody's got a story. Everyone's trying to figure out what it means, where we go. I thought this was an interesting image. I think I'm trying to understand it as a diptych. The image on the left with the light coming through the pill bottles, does that mean salvation or does that mean the fix? And then, of course, the image on the right, trust me, there's been a lot of vodka in my apartment in the last 90 days. So I think I'm understanding of, I'm not sure. But I do like the idea of trying to play with how we navigate this time. So I'm just trying to understand what these two paired up mean.
Score is 19.
Next image is Coyote Patrol, Ken Pfeiffer critiquing.
And there's a really cool story here. I just let my mind wander. And it's just intrigues me what comes up. With this picture too, there's a nice exposure of the snow and there's a good texture. There's really nice light on the bottom coyote. One problem is the bottom coyote, the one in the foreground, isn't quite sharp. And the foreground is quite blurry. The snow and grasses are not sharp at all. And I wish the grasses had not been there because it's sort of interfering with the beauty of the picture for me.
Score is 21.
Yeah, I think if this image had been put into the first category and manipulated, it could have been pretty interesting.
Right, next image is Earth Day, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
Beautiful execution on the gauziness of the waves and a little bit of mist on the water. Might want to consider a little bit higher crop, a little bit less beach in the foreground, perhaps. The two little complaints that I have is there are spots in the sky and the horizon is tilted. So those are two easy fixes. And I think if you do that, then you got a really nice, beautiful image. And maybe take a little bit off of the left-hand side. But I think the use of the shutter speed was perfect.
Score is 23.
Next image is Fishing in Myanmar, Krista Dix critiquing.
This is certainly a classic image of an idea of what a place looks like. It's one of those fantasy images. What I really love about the image is catching the sunlight in the net. So it goes through the net and pours out onto his foot and into the water. And to me, that was just a tremendous catch. I don't know if that was intentional and found, or if it was a beautiful found moment after capture. I'm a little bit concerned. The only concern I have, of course, is that it's centered, and I'd like a little bit of it off balance. But otherwise, it's a spectacular image.
Score is 24.
Next image is Flower at Sunrise, Ken Pfeiffer critiquing.
That flower is very beautiful. I love the backlighting, and there's a nice foreground, middle ground, and background, which creates a lot of apparent depth in this picture. The patterns in the water are very interesting. The crop to me is not ideal because there's detail that's so close to the top border. It makes for distractions. Also, the image size is very small and the image quality is extremely poor. If you look at the foreground, just to the bottom and left of that flower, it's very granular and noisy, right? Even in the foreground.
Well, is it possible that that was intentional? I mean, it's definitely telling a story. The thing I like about the image is the angularity of it. I like the idea that there's something bottom left, and the top line doesn't bother me at all. And there's something about either the clouds being reflected in the water or the way that the water is chopped. It does tell a story all the way up, but I'm just wondering if maybe that the pixelation in the water was somehow intentional, like a filter that somebody wanted to overlay, making it more watercolor-y as opposed to specifically photographic.
Score is 19.
Next image is Good Catch, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
And how much fun is this? The only thing I'd have a couple suggestions. One would be for the photographer either to find a bit of beach that's more pristine and replicate it, or get down, choose a lower point of view so that you're not showing as much beach, which would maybe give you the advantage of also showing the height at which this dog is achieved. The other thing that I would like to see would be the symmetry of fourth image on the right, where the angle of re-entry is matching the angle of takeoff, just to make it perfectly symmetrical. But I think if you clean up the foreground, you got something. So
Score is 23.
Next image is L.A., critique by Krista Dix.
Isn't that LACMA?
Yeah, it's the rock. It's the giant boulder at LACMA.
Oh, my bad. LACMA.
Yeah, loved it. Love the textures on this. Love the strength, the iron holding up the boulder. It took me a while to sort of get myself balanced into it, which made me really happy because I want to spend more time with an image. I don't want to be given all of the answers right out of the gate. So this let me sit there and look and play and try to figure out which way was actually up. And then I realized it didn't matter, that there was so much of the image for me to play in that I didn't mind which way it went.
Score is 21.
Next image is Lesser Finch, Ken Pfeiffer commenting.
Okay, this is another very nice bird portrait. Great bokeh, good exposure, good colors. My problem with this one is the bird is just not very sharp. And also, it's not usually a good idea to center the subject if you were to crop off some of the left of this, so the bird would be more to the left, to the left of center, and had some breathing room in front. I think it would be a good idea.
Score is 17.
Next image is Life's a Beach, Brent Weinbrenner commenting.
I laughed for about 10 minutes. Maybe you could try a MAGA hat. I don't know. It's awesome. I mean, it's a perfect moment, and I wish I'd taken that picture. I don't know about the vest, but I'm not going to pick nits. It's so cute. So, yeah, the timing was just spectacular, and the expression and the one ear. So, nice job.
Score is 26.
Next scoring of the night, I think.
Next image is Moonstone Moment, Krista Dix commenting.
Oh, Moonstone Drive, one of my favorite places. Um, Beautifully captured. I really love the painterly quality of this. Um, and I also like the idea that it's somewhat panoramic. You feel like you can just sit there and watch that forever. Um, the tonal quality of it, the palette is good. Um, the waves hitting the rock and the beautiful detail that you have for the spray back is just really nice. Overall, just a really great image.
Score is 21.
Next image is No Picnics, No Fires, critique by Ken Pfeiffer.
Okay, this is just a beautiful, delicate black and white. It just gives me a nice, peaceful feeling, but a melancholy feeling. And of course, the black and white is good for that melancholy mood. It has sort of an infrared look. It was taken in April, according to the exit. But it would be nice to differentiate the middle ground trees from background hills. If you look carefully, you can see that the trees are sort of in the middle ground, and there's some hills back there in the background, and they're all sort of mashed together. And the black and white conversion that you do could, I think you might be able to give this more depth by differentiating the middle ground from the background. It also, when I first looked at this, it was not clear to me that the objects in this picture are apparently upturned picnic benches on fire pits. And of course, that's the title. But I thought it was playground equipment at first. It took me a while to see what it was. So that initially wasn't clear to me.
Score is 19.
Next image is Oh My Aching Feet, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
I think with images like this, you want to choose your backgrounds first, perhaps, and make sure that they're, providing some value or adding to the image. By shooting wide, it accentuates the feet, but it brings a whole bunch of stuff into the background, and you might have been able to use a longer lens, shooting between the feet, capturing the guy's look or his face between them, and had a much more pleasing background, and you would have been able to eliminate the pedestal. So I think when you see things like this, you just spend time working it in 360 degrees, thinking backgrounds almost as at the same time you're thinking the subject itself.
The score is 21.
Next image is Old Cotton Loading Area, critique by Krista Dix.
I like this image. It's kind of like a postcard image. The question that I have is, is this an image that you saw in your head and wanted to go capture, or is this a found object? I like the framing on the top. The thing that's coming into mind that just is bugging me is the roof on the left-hand side. That gray roof just doesn't hit for me in the right angle. So I'd either come around or cut that edge off so that the frame itself is the edges of the actual composition.
Score is 21.
Next image is Old Window, critique by Ken Pfeiffer.
This is really interesting. I like the colors, I like the shading, the really nice contrast of light and dark. The cobweb patterns are very intriguing. It really makes me wonder what the story or context is here. The one thing I wonder about is how this is cropped. As you can see, there are some tangents that bar in the bottom right, and also the left side of this bothers me quite a bit because it bows away from the corner. So I would consider cropping this a little bit differently. And that's it.
Score is 19.
Next image is Sky Palette. Brent Weinbrenner commenting.
In an earlier image, I mentioned that I liked having the triangle at the top of the waterfall. Here, the upper left, it bothers me a tiny little bit. I'd like to see the crop come in an inch. I'd like to see the bottom of the balloon rather than have it cut off. And, you know, in a perfect world, there would be flames adding perhaps some storytelling component to this. And maybe the guy'd have a red shirt on instead of aqua. But you can't argue with the colors and the vibrancy of it. So it's just compositionally, I think, in my mind, a couple of small moves and that would have enhanced it.
Score is 21.
Next image is Staircase, comments by Krista Dix.
Oh, I love me a good piece of architecture. This is beautifully captured. The light on the floor from the windows, really nice. The glow on that brass handrail, also really good. Overall, just a strong, solid image.
Score is 24.
Next image is Street Scene, comments by Ken Pfeiffer.
I saw this, I just had to laugh. I love it. It's really funny. And I was trying to think of a story that would lead to this. And it's sort of like the theater of the absurd. The Raven in there is a nice touch. You know, what's this guy doing here? To improve this, see, the Raven is obviously pasted in. It's not blended into the scene well. There's a bright line across its belly and the light's not coming from there. And the feet are not hooked onto that toilet in a believable way. The worst thing that I see that could be easily fixed is the camera's not straight, the light standard is not straight, and the building is really wonky on the right side, which just drives me nuts. I'd like to see the camera straight, and I'd like to see that building straightened up.
Yeah, I would have shot this from ground level, I think, to get rid of all the parking lot, and I'd have moved around to get rid of the air gas truck if I could too.
Score is 20.
Next image is Table Setting, comments by Brent Weinbrenner.
Pay attention to details. There's a little bit of a flaw in the paper in the lower right-hand corner. I presume this is all about the shadows. So I'd maybe lose the things on the left side that are interfering with the termination of the shadow from the napkin, and perhaps introduce a water glass or something that has some height and volume that throws another shadow. You might experiment with a gobo or something that goes in between the light source and this to provide some modulation or level of interest. But you know, the fork is a great starting point. And then I would just play with shapes like the napkin. Can you get a triangle out of that napkin by rearranging it, or add some level of interest, and I think lose everything on the left.
Score is 20.
Next image is Tide Pool Still Life, critiqued by Krista Dix.
I think this was a great idea. For me, the execution is just a little bit off. The image itself is super soft. There's no real depth of field. It's hard to tell what's above water and what's below water. And then the palette is super muted. And I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more vibrancy, because I know that those blues and oranges could really pop. But there's something about it that it almost feels like it's a Polaroid transfer as far as that sort of quality of depth and dimension. But like I say, it was a good idea. I just think the execution could have been a little bit stronger. Maybe cropping in on the right-hand side and getting rid of a little bit more of the sand to bring
Yeah,
that.
in a body of work with a similar treatment, maybe it works better than as a single.
Yeah.
Score is 17.
Next image is Trona Pinnacles. Comments by Ken Pfeiffer.
This is super beautiful. I like the nice foreground, middle ground, and background, creating wonderful apparent depth in this image. The colors are very pleasing and harmonious. The exposure's good, the tonality's good, everything's sharp. It makes me wish I was there.
Score is 24.
Next image is Vatican Spiral. Comments by Brent Weinbrenner.
This is a tough image because we've seen this before, and I think we almost have to have the Dalai Lama and the Pope walking arm in arm to add interest. I'm not bothered, but if I would burn down the highlight values at the bottom and maybe crop so that triangle in the lower left is eliminated, and scooch it a little bit to the left so there's a little more symmetry. But these images that we've seen before are really tough to execute.
Score is 22.
Next image is Walking the Line, critique by Krista Dix.
Really solid image, hard to get. That wildlife thing, it's one of those things, you either you have it in that moment or you don't. I think what's fascinating for me is reading the image with all the different colors of camel. It's almost feels like there's one camel that's 15 miles long.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the depth on that is super hard. I'm a little bit distracted by the highlights in the dunes up above them. I'd almost rather see that come down so that you keep your focus on the camels. But otherwise, a solid image, great capture.
Score is 22.
All right, that's the end of the pictures from the open category.
And there's 17 accepted images. Barn Owl, Steve Lewis. Cambodian Water Lily, Linda Cavanaugh. Celebrate, George Wellick. Coyote Patrol, Bruce Straits. Earth Day, Sally Berry. Fishing in Myanmar, Bill Hellier. Good Catch, Jeff Lipschitz. LACMA, Dave Basso. Life's a Beach, Bob Rottenberg. Moonstone Moment, Bill Banning. Oh My Aching Feet, Deb Gibson. Old Cotton Loading Area, Lorraine Woodman. Sky Palette, Craig Woodman. Staircase, Chris Seaton. Trona Pinnacles, Stuart Wilson. Vatican Spiral, Stephen Sherrill. Walking the Line, Ron Williams.
That's the end of the categories accepted images. Our next category is people.
Yeah.
First image is Bobby Rush at 80, critique by Ken Pfeiffer.
This is nice. It's a good exposure in what looks to be a very difficult situation, which I presume is live theater. There's pretty good details in the highlights and the shadows without a lot of noise. It's a great expression, a great pose. The big problem I see with this is the face is just not sure.
Score is 18.
Next image is Body Language, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
This kind of reminded me of my last relationship. It's certainly a non-traditional interaction between the two figures. I mean, I looked at it for quite a while. Her body, just, I want to see, the movement's so sensual, the lines are so sensual. I think the costume just detracts a little bit from perhaps what we might otherwise see. I'm amused, but I don't know if I'm put off by their relationship or if I'm intrigued by it. And I know it's really hard in the stage, perhaps that you could make an argument that the purple on the left-hand side helps tell us where it is, but it might be better without it. But I don't know what to say about this image, other than what I've said. Somebody help me.
So for me, the hands, his hands are sort of in the air. I don't mind her arch or watch it or seeing her foot at the base. There's just something about where his hands are to me that throw the balance of the image off. Is he going to hold her? Is he not going to hold her? But it's an interesting image for sure.
Yeah, maybe therein lies the appeal. I don't know.
The score is 20.
What was the score?
20.
Go ahead. Okay.
Right. Next image is Burlesque Theater Exit, critique by Krista Dix.
I actually really like the palette of this. My biggest issue is that everything in it is soft. I know it's an impossible image to get. The woman's hand on the right-hand side is super distracting to me. If we want the image to be about her, let's make it about her. So go ahead and wipe out that foreground and make those just black shadowy figures and give her all the life in the room. But the other thing, of course, is that I want her to be a little bit sharper, which is just harder to do, but that makes her the center of the image to me.
The score was 17.
The next image is Christina. Comment by Ken Pfeiffer.
Okay, this looks like a very difficult situation. It looks like it's live theater. The lighting is not good. I mean, in the theater, the lighting is dark. There's a lot of action. I like the pose. It's fun. This image is exposed very well. There's great sharpness, great freezing of action. And the most impressive thing is there's absolutely no noise whatsoever in this. So I think this is a phenomenal image.
Score is 23.
Next image is Chumash Dancer, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
I think it's a pretty image of a pretty girl. The focus is spot on. I love her eyes. I'm not sure about the expression of her mouth. I might have tried to pull back just a little bit to include the full circle of the bangle on the right-hand side. I like the lighting. It's flattering. It's easy lighting on her, and you know, the colors and everything work together. Maybe just a tiny bit more room above her headdress as well.
Having shot a lot of powwows myself, I know how almost impossible it is to
Right.
get all of that regalia without getting a lot of garbage in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's why the crop happened, I understand that, but I think that there's ways now that you can soften up that background and still give her a lot more due. Because I'm sure her regalia was just amazing. You can see the beadwork, it looks great. So opening that up a little bit would probably have helped the image for sure.
The score was 20.
Next image is COVID Companions. Critique is by Krista Dix.
I'm hitting all of the COVID tonight. I mean, the state of Massachusetts has one of the highest rates of COVID, and somebody in my building actually died about a month ago. So we've all been on lockdown. And so I understand every single one of these faces. I almost want them to just be the heads, though. I think there's just a little bit too much for me on the bottom half. So I would pull in a little bit tighter so that it would just be about that mental expression of what in the actual F is happening here around me, but really clever.
Score is 21.
The next image is Dinner. Comments by Ken Pfeiffer.
Well, this is a great slice of life. It's just an amazing expression. You talk about capturing the decisive moment. I think it's really creative and interesting and moving. Exposure's good. Contrast, sharpness, detail, it's all wonderful. And there's a really good isolation of the subject with the vignette. I think this is just outstanding.
See, I think the vignette is just a little too hot for me, but I'd almost want it to be a little bit more realistic.
Score was 24.
Next image is Dying for a Smoke, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
I know these red plastic bags are probably everywhere now. It's a kind of a buzzkill in this case. I think the highlight values are a little bit too high. Whatever it is on the right hand side doesn't add. Having said that, there's a start of something really interesting going on the left hand side with the shadow. And so I think if the photographer worked the contrast here, it might pop a little bit more and crop a little bit tighter. And when you see side lighting like this, you know, look for that shadow and see where it makes the most sense. But my biggest complaint about this is just the setting, and then the highlights are too hot. But I love the side light and the shadow play on the left.
The score was 20.
The next image is Glennis. Comments by Krista Dix.
I think this is just a really lovely headshot. What I'm hoping that it's a sort of corporate shot. I personally would probably have pulled up the bottom third of the image so that her head is the majority of the image, as opposed that black sweater takes up a lot of space. Like the backlighting, like the idea that her face is well lit, and I love the expression. So there's a really nice quality between the photographer and the sitter on this. I I would let her face shine out of the image a little bit more, just with the actual composition.
Score was 22.
Next image is How to Eat a Tarantula, comment by Ken Pfeiffer.
Wow. The subject matter here is very dramatic. I like the eye contact with the left two subjects. The exposure is pretty good, and there's pretty good sharpness, except for the kid on the right. I would improve this by completely crop out the kid on the right as well as the kid in the background. Also, I'd open up the aperture considerably because the background's too sharp. There should be more of a bokeh here. Also, the light's pretty glary. You can see the shine on the skin, so I would bring down the highlights a bit, get rid of the shine on the skin. And the skin color seems very distorted to me. So I would also add a hue saturation adjustment layer, bring down the reds, mask it out, and then paint that lessened red into the faces on the left, particularly along the hairlines, where it looks like it's just color is just way off.
Score is 18.
Next image is Indian Farmer, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
Gotta love the guy's hair. Rule of thirds again. I think, eyes dead set in the middle of the frame. I'd pull him down in the frame a little bit. I'd burn the corners down so that we're drawn to his face and not to his scarf. We're not tempted to go to the shoulder. But the guy's eating the camera up, and so presumably the photographer has a number of images here, but I would just reframe it. Focus is good, no complaints there.
Score is 21.
Next image is Mask, comments by Krista Dix.
I thought this was really clever. It took me a while to find the eyes. I mean, I was looking at it and I was looking at it. I'm like, there's something happening here. But I was so drawn to the texture on the concrete wall in the back that I completely lost sight of the eyes until I just happened to glance at it and found them. It's really clever. The balance is off a little. Again, I think there's too much chest. I would bring it in or bring it up a little bit. And then maybe, I don't know, that concrete is really vibrant in comparison to the scarf. And I almost feel like it's in conflict, but if there was a way to bring that down a little and bring the scarf up, I think it would challenge the balance of the photo and have it be more dimensional, but otherwise a clever image.
Score is 21.
Next image is Men at Work, critique by Ken Pfeiffer.
Okay, this is very interesting. There's a good story here. It's a humorous environmental portrait. The main subject is this man in the foreground. Some problems here. The image is also quite small. It's low resolution. The image quality is not very good. If you look at it, the main subject is quite blurry. He is not looking at the camera. He has this sort of WTF expression on his face, and there's lots of distractions and junk in there. I would somehow manage to get a better quality image and get closer.
Score is 18.
Next image is Ninja, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
This is pretty nice. The only thing that I would suggest is strive for perfect symmetry. Watch her hands. They're aligned with the camera slightly differently. My preference would be to have them like her right hand, our left, facing that way, and then her 2 feet, in the same position, and maybe her shirt tucked in. But you know, those are nits, and that's, you know, the next time you do this. But I think if it were perfectly symmetrical, it would be a little bit stronger image. I'm not sure if I would eliminate the. I think I would. I would try to get rid of the wrinkles on the in post production on the ground, so it's just a white seamless.
Score is 20.
Next image is Surfing Dream. Comments by Krista Dix.
Catching a great surfing image is complicated and hard. I'm not enamored of this image only because his hands look super awkward. If it's an action shot, it's almost like he's just sort of hanging on top of the wave, which may be the intention, but for me, it just falls a little bit flat. There's also, the palette is not super vibrant, so it's a nice attempt for me, but it doesn't hold a lot of visual interest for me.
Score is 18.
Next image is The Art Critic. Comments by Ken Pfeiffer.
I'm getting all the funny ones. So what's the subject here? So I noticed that people are wearing modern clothes here. From the exit, it looks like the image is taken this year. I'm not sure why there's this vintage treatment, you know, the sepia and the sprocket holes in the film and so forth. The image is also a bit underexposed and it's hard to see.
Score is 18.
Okay, that's the end of the category.
We had 6 accepted images. Christina Stephen Sherrill. COVID Companions, Judith Barrett. Dinner, Jeff Lipschitz. Glenny's, Ron Williams. Indian Farmer, Bill Hellier. Mass, Bill Banning.
That's it for the categories accepted images. Our next category is prints. This is, we're actually have brought back printed images. Each judge was mailed 6 prints that were 8.5 by 11 or lower. These are the digital files that were submitted along with them, but the judging was based on actually having prints in the hands by the judges. So the first image is Calla Lilies, critiqued by Brent Weinbrenner.
I had to dig really deep to find anything to say about this. So I went online and I learned that what a stigma is. And so the only thing I can point out is that the stigma on the top flower is just a tiny little bit hotter than the stigma on the other 2. So that's all I got to offer. But I learned what a stigma is. It's a really pretty image. So it's very well executed.
Yeah.
Score was 26.
Next image is Corona, critiqued by Krista Dix.
I like this image. The crop on it for me was just a little bit tight. The balance, there's a little bit more green in the bottom than I would like if we're supposed to be looking at the flower itself. So I'd either go in a little bit more or pull out a little bit more, but the color balance is good. I like all the fur on with the center of the flower. And all of those little stamens are really crazy. So it was an interesting image to look at. I just think the crop could be a little different.
Score was 24.
Next image is Flying, critique by Brent Weinbrenner.
Perfect composition, the color palette, the yellow and blue, obviously works well together. Just a nice moment that are captured at the right place. So, a pretty picture.
Score was 20.
Next image is Memorial, comments by Krista Dix.
I like the idea of the image. What I'm looking for desperately is a little bit of contrast in the image. I'd like a little bit more of the flowers to pull out from the background. I understand the idea for warming it up, the idea of memory, the idea of loss, the idea of age. But the tonal range, I think there could be a super crisp white and a nice heavy black to pull out the details and the tones.
Score was 21.
Next image is Quiet Time, comments by Ken Pfeiffer.
Okay, this is a nice, serene beach portrait, and I love the footprints behind the bird. Paints a nice story of him just kind of cruising along easily. It's a nice blurred background. The print looks quite different from the digital version because the print, the background isn't quite so glary, but it's not quite as sharp either. But this is a really nice portrait. What might be better here is to get closer or to use a longer focal length so you've got more of the bird in the image.
Score is 25.
Next image is Textured Sand, Haskell's Beach, comment by Ken Pfeiffer.
And this is a beautiful beach scene. It's reminiscent of some old vintage fine art block prints. The texture is great. Nice leading lines. Black and white is really good for texture, where the colors might be distracting. The colors are interesting. One issue I'm having is my eye goes to the areas that are brightest, which are the clouds. It's not the subject, but the nominal subject. It also goes to the areas of high contrast, which are these very large areas of pure black. So I keep looking away from what is the nominal subject, which is the texture. This might be a more pleasant image if the blacks weren't so severely crushed. I'm also confused about the title because, if the subject is texture, then the rest of the picture should be the supporting cast. So I'm not sure if texture is the best title for this.
Score is 23.
That's it for the prints. Accepted images.
We had 5 accepted prints. Calla Lilies, Ron Oblis. Corona, Ron Williams. Memorial, Bill Banning. Quiet Time, Sally Berry. Textured Sand, Haskell's Beach, David Austin.
Okay, that's the end of this category. We do have we have 2 videos to show. I'm going to pause the screen share for a minute and get ready to set up a new one. The first video that we'll be watching, I have to say this again, if you haven't seen this on Flickr, Zoom is a pretty bad location for video. So the first one is it's Hans Christian Andersen Park.
Hans Christian Andersen Park is 52 acres located near the heart of Solvang.
that better?
Yeah.
Yep.
Better.
Okay.
Enter through a decorative castle arch. Soon you'll see a miniature water wheel. To the right is a skate park, suitable for all skill levels.
Awesome.
Shady Atterdag Bowl is nearby for picnicking and formerly for theater performance. Further down the main road is a playground and several other spacious picnic areas with covered shelters. The pavement ends past the main picnic areas where a dirt road takes you by tennis courts. Two main hiking trails go from near the park entrance through a tranquil oak woodland toward the end of the park. Trails can also be used for cycling and horseback riding. Near the end of the dirt road is a rock climbing wall. There's a variety of native plants throughout the park and plenty of open space. Come enjoy a relaxing day in nature at Hans Christian Andersen Park in Solvang.
Okay, let's have comment, and this is Chris.
It's a very lovely sort of promotional video. I'd like to know what the intent was, whether it was specifically to create a sort of welcome to Hans Christian Andersen Park, or if there was a larger story behind it. The only sort of qualm I have is we spend a lot of time at the skate park in comparison to everywhere else. I wouldn't have minded seeing more landscape in between so that you get a better sense, not just of the objects in the park, but the whole layout of the park.
Our next one, I'm going to go back to share, and it's called Santa Barbara in Lockdown. Okay, Brent, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I do. I've got a couple. I think it's really hard to show absence. One thing that I might have considered would be a time-lapse image. We had that opening shot or nearly opening shot with the traffic light. And if you showed that traffic light changing 6 or 7 times and no pedestrians on the street, we would get perhaps the idea a little bit stronger that it's empty. I would search for maybe some more compelling images of absence than the signage that we had. The soundtrack, I was back in the 1920s Paris where it's surreal or avant-garde. I'm not quite sure what the soundtrack was doing for it. So I'd be considerate of that. And then just the camera moves. There were a couple places where it was with the person at Cottage Hospital checking people in, it was coming in and out of focus. So just be careful of the camera work. But you picked whoever did it picked a tough conceptual subject, and I would look for the passage of time with the absence of people and how you show that. So.
Okay, that wraps it up for tonight. I want to say thank you to our 3 judges. This is a learning experience for all of us, and thanks for your patience with the little technical glitches. We keep getting a little bit better, a little more right each time. So Krista and Brent, thank you. Our club judge, Ken, always a pleasure to hear you. We did record this, and within a week I'll have a version of it posted with a link for you to see this.